Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this session where we have some great speakers here. This is the North Carolina education session. We have some great speakers here lined up today. We're about to have our moderator, Grace Nystrum. She's having a little technical difficulty joining us, but we'll go ahead and kick us off, and then hopefully Grace can join us shortly. Grace is one of our partners here in Charlotte. She's been with Bank of America since 1996, and she is currently responsible for driving the Hispanic Latino segment strategy in the local Charlotte market. Prior to this role, Grace served as executive director at Camino Community Center through Bank of America's Executives on Loan program. She was on assignment at Camino for almost 2 years. Outside of her work, Grace is very involved and passionate about the Latino community. She currently serves as the chair of the board of directors of the Latin American Chamber of Commerce here in Charlotte, and she's also an active member of the Hispanic Scholarship Fund, and she lives here in Charlotte with her husband and 2 children. So we have, like I mentioned, we have a great panel here today. What we're going to do while Grace joins us is we're going to ask each of our panelists to take about 90 seconds to tell us a little bit about themselves, and also what does equity in education mean to you and why it's important. Let's go ahead and get started with let's start with Banu.
Thank you. My name is Vano Valles, and I'm the executive director of Charlotte Bilingual Preschool, where we prepare Spanish-speaking children for success in school and life by providing them with a high-quality, dual language, multicultural preschool education. So equity for me in education means having no barriers to achieving whatever dreams you want to have. So that means having the opportunities, the networks, the resources, plus also the removal of inequity to me means we can no longer predict the trajectory of success or failure of a person based on their gender, ethnicity, or demographics. So the reason that equity is super important, particularly for me and for the work that we do, is that our children are disproportionately impacted by a system that is inequitable, and so 1/4 of them are not graduating from high school because they don't have access to an early education. So we see that our work is absolutely essential in changing the trajectory. So this is one of the ways that we make the system a little bit more equitable with early intervention.
Great, thank you so much, Banu. Sil, do you want to go next?
Yeah. Hey everyone, my name is Silgan Sosa. I am founder and executive director of Outreach for Kids here in Charlotte. Outreach works with refugee, immigrant, asylum-seeking, and first-generation American children. Originally, pre-COVID, we provided after-school summer programs and holistic source of services for the entire family as they arrive to the United States and they start a new life here. And to me, equity means that every child receives the tools and the resources they need to not only succeed academically, but also to be in charge of their own learning journey while developing a sense of worth and a belief that they can reach their full potential regardless of where they live, where they came from. It's important as the demographics in Charlotte are showing that, schools are going to be more diverse by the year. I think that it's important for schools to adapt to the communities that they are working with instead of requiring families to adapt to an old system.
Thank you, Sil. I appreciate that. Let's go with Alexandra, and then we'll finish off with James.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alexandra Valdez, and I am a board member for Durham Public Schools in Durham, North Carolina. And so this question is definitely all the things that all our wonderful panelists have mentioned: barriers, ensuring access. For me, it's also an understanding of the historical context. So I do believe that in order to be able to remove inequities, we have to understand how the system has been designed and what are some of the things that have happened in the past so that as we start building kind of like more of a systems analysis, that we can definitely be very intentional, right, about how we are setting things up so that all our kids can be successful.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, beautifully stated. I don't really have much to say beyond introducing myself. So I'm James E. Ford, Executive Director of the. We are a North Carolina-based organization that exists to close racialized opportunity gaps for students of color in the pre-K to 20 or post-secondary pipeline. For me, equity, as stated, is situated in historical context. I'm a former history teacher myself in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, and with an emerging Browning and non-white population, specifically in North Carolina, we're going to have to respond to the diverse culturally and linguistically learning styles of students and respond to the historical inequities that continue to rob our communities of educational opportunity.
Thank you, James. And Grace, I knew you would be right on time to get into the meat of this discussion, and I am excited that you are going to be moderating for us. So I've already given an introduction about you and all of the wonderful things that you do here in Charlotte. Thank you again for moderating. I'm going to hand the session over to you. And I just want to thank everyone who's on here. We're excited to be in North Carolina, the Hispanic Federation office, and we're looking forward to working with all of you as we think about how we can create more equity in education across our state.
Perfect. So thanks so much, Daniel, and thanks to the panel, and apologize for being a few minutes late. But of course, we have a great panel, distinguished panel. And as Daniel mentioned earlier, the focus of today's discussion is around the state of education equity in North Carolina. And I know folks have already introduced themselves, so we're just going to jump right into the agenda. So one of the things that we hear a lot from educators, local leaders, and influencers that education equity is becoming a popular phrase. My question for the panel is, what does equity in education mean to you?
Hey, Grace.
You? James?
I'm not sure if it's just me, but I'm having trouble.
Can you hear me?
Great, yeah, we're having trouble hearing you. And we built the first question in with their introduction, so folks had already talked about the particular question, but we are having a hard time hearing your audio.
Okay, you are having a hard time. I don't know what else to do with my audio. But Daniel, do you want to go ahead and ask me?
Maybe let's try this. How about you take off your camera and then just leave your sometimes there's too much to do both the audio and the camera.
Okay, we can do that. Let's try that. Okay, well, you can still see me then. That's not working.
Yeah, there should be a little thing that says stop video.
Well, Daniel, do you want to go ahead and, in the interest of time, do you want to go ahead and ask the second question? Because I want to make sure we get through all these questions. And then I'm going to work through here because I can see, just trying to just continue my camera here.
No, absolutely. So the second question, and this is something that's on a lot of people's minds, of course, a lot of this is a topic that's been impacting not just education, but everything across the country. And it's how COVID has impacted the education system in our public school systems. And so I want to ask this question particularly to Alexandra about how has COVID impacted public education, and what has been some of the greatest challenges, and what are we doing effectively to support our students and families with diverse backgrounds?
That is a question that is, the topic of conversation and also of concern for a lot of us on the board. I will say that, the challenges that we know during this COVID pandemic are how all the social inequities have just come up, to the point that we see the intersectionality, right? We can't attain equity in education without addressing all the inequities that our students experience day in and day out. So there are a lot of concerns in terms of food security, in terms of digital access. The digital divide, has been one of those topics. We have, as a district, tried to address these different things, and I'll talk a little bit about what we have done or what we continue to do. Language access, it has really become has centered the importance of having structural supports for families. When it comes to housing, where are our kids learning from? Are they in a safe space? What are they being exposed to? Environmental contaminants, or like some of the community violence that is happening in some areas, and trauma responses, and so many different things. So the biggest challenges have been how, as a district, how as an institution that is forward learning, that is to provide a sound and basic education for every single student. How do we address all the disparities that individual students experience? And some of them overlap, some of them are very different. We have homeless populations. We have students that are qualified under McKinney-Vento. We have students that are EC who require and have gotten provisions through some provisions that they can't utilize right now because of COVID, right? So innovation type things where they could have gotten supports in the house, but because of COVID, they can't get those. And I can go on and on and on, but I think it is about like really understanding the complexity of, social determinants or social drivers of health and well-being and success and as many other things, and how, as an institution, how to ensure that we are partnering, how to ensure that we are meeting that. So I'm going to go into a little bit of the solutions and don't want to take up too much time, but in terms of, and I may not cover all of them for time. Do I have like a minute? Okay, 1 minute. Okay, so, for language access and the digital divide, for example, we have a system that is statewide, right? The Canvas system that we're using, the LMS, the learning management system that we have, which is set up only in English. So for a lot of our Latino families, it's like navigating a platform that isn't built to accommodate multiple languages or, any other language other than English. It is a challenge. And as much as we, have tutorials and we have PowerPoints and we have live sessions and we talk to parents and we are on the phone and parents call me and then they call the central office and they talk to the Multilingual Resource Center, which was created, as well as the Equity Office was created in the past few years to address these disparities. But as much as we're doing the structural things, the systems, the platforms, the technology that it has yet to embrace multilingualism to that degree, that does pose a challenge. So we have asked our admins to think out, think as to resource from within what we can offer families. And I know that the Multilingual Resource Center, which is supposed to do interpretation, mainly that's their charge to do interpretation, they have been opening their doors for one-on-one tutorials with families. For beginning from registration that was done online. They were also helping families navigate Canvas. They were going out and doing Facebook Lives with the community. For food access, a lot of us, I personally have been out there on the streets with different nonprofits delivering food, masks, addressing some of the water bills that are coming in and families, facing eviction, and ensuring that we're pushing out as many resources. As a district, we have ensured that our website has resources and has, that we partner with institutions. So anyways, I probably went over my minute, but I could go on and on. Those are some of the things that we're doing.
No, I think that those are all great things to point out. And these are the kinds of things that folks want to hear, particularly those that are really interested in how folks are responding to COVID. One of the things, as you mentioned, COVID has exposed so many things that we already know existed in our communities and really have exacerbated those areas as well. Anybody else want to do a sentence or two or anything before we move on to the next question? We have lots of questions for everyone here, so everyone's going to get a shot to talk about sort of their work as well. But anyone want to speak to anything that Alex mentioned or share anything before we move on to the next question? Okay, great. So the next question that I have here is for you, Sil. From your perspective, what has been the greatest challenges that you and your staff observe for our refugee and immigrant communities, and what does our school system need to do to support them to ensure their success?
Yeah, I love this question. And it's funny because with COVID, like Alex said, I mean, it has been exacerbated. Right now it's obvious. But for the last 10 years that I've been working directly with refugee and immigrant families, I think that the biggest factor that I have seen is just the general lack of a space for understanding, awareness, and just plain compassion, especially when it comes to newly arrived kids. We see every day how kids who arrived today, they're placed in school tomorrow, and they're expected to listen to a person speaking another language for 7 hours a day. And they're expected to look and listen to a teacher that they don't understand what they're saying. They're expected to complete the same work at the same pace, with the same results that their English-speaking peers are doing, and to magically know, understand, and comply with all social expectations and rules that American-born kids have been taught since birth. That's the biggest issue that I have seen in school, that it's the root of many, many other issues as they start their journey their journey in the American schools. It's heartbreaking, honestly, to see students with limited or interrupted formal education who have experienced war, civil unrest, migration, kids who were born in refugee camps that had never had the opportunity to participate in an educational setting, kids who have never held a pencil before. And they're yelled at, and they're punished, and they're asked to walk laps if they don't do their homework, and they get ISS or OSS for months. I think that's something that we need to talk about when we talk about inequity, is the way our children are being disciplined and the lack of understanding and restorative practices to help them heal and understand that they can do better. So your question is, what can schools do to ensure refugee and immigrant kids are successful? I will say two things. Number one, every district should abandon rigid, prescriptive, and damaging parameters ASAP and fully adopt trauma-informed care practices and training, as there is full evidence that this benefits all kids, regardless of race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic background. And number two, and I think that this is super important, imagine if all newly arrived kids would have a place and a school to go where it's like a landing cushion, where they have the time to adjust, where parents are talked to in their own languages, where cultures are celebrated, and the vast knowledge that families bring to their country is actually included in the activities and in the curriculum, a place where they can learn English, that it's mistake safe, without that feeling of being a burden. And, the meals could be culturally sensitive, and there's just human beings prepared to support the kids as they adjust to a new life. Basically, what I'm saying is I would love to see more newcomer schools. I think that Charlotte-Mecklenburg needs one right away. I know of two. One is in Texas. It's called Las Americas, and it's amazing. And another one's in Greensboro. So, I would love to see more of those.
Thank you, Sil. I'm trying to make sure that I practice good etiquette by muting myself, but sometimes I forget that I'm on mute. So, but no, I think that all the things that you mentioned are great, and I think that that leaning on what other organizations, other communities have done is critical to this work. So I think Grace just rejoined us, so maybe we'll try again and see if the audio is a bit better. Grace, can you hear us?
Okay, so can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you okay, yeah.
Perfect. So my question, I believe the last question you had was for Sil. So my question is for James, actually. James, we know that racial disparities in the U.S. public schools are nothing new. And for our students of color, unfortunately, their experiences in North Carolina do not differ. Your organization, CREED, is taking a look at how we got here and where we are today. The question is, what do you share with us that will begin to disrupt this pattern and charting a path forward?
Well, again, this
Hopefully
is
you're able to hear.
Oh, I was. That was great. Thank you for that, Grace. And it was an excellent question. And I want to state simply that we exist in an education system that was not created to serve the students who currently occupy it. It was not made in their image. And so we do continue to see those disparities, not just here in North Carolina, but writ large. My organization did exhaustive research of all of the students in North Carolina and looked at it through the lens of race, and we found several things. We found that at every rung of the educational experience, students of color, there are opportunity gaps for them, either in access or in outcomes. For Latinx students in particular, they're 17% of the overall public school population, but there is only 2.3% of the teacher workforce who identify as Latinx. And so that means that only 1% of the courses that Latinx students take are taught by teachers of the same race or ethnicity. And we know that that makes a difference in terms of a lot of different things that impact educational opportunity. Latinx students are underrepresented in both AP and honors courses throughout the entire state of North Carolina. They have a diminished likelihood of being identified as gifted by comparison to their white counterparts. And they have the highest dropout rate in the state, unfortunately. And the reasons they cite oftentimes have particular meanings that don't often get dug into. So Latinx students are not more likely to be identified as needing special education. But the interesting thing about that is students of color writ large are. And what's concerning is that if you are an emergent bilingual student, that category alone increases your likelihood of being identified as special education by 106%. And so that's particularly unnerving for us. It creates a huge gap in opportunity. And in summary, it's a system that I think perpetuates inequality by setting our students up for diminished opportunities and ultimately low wage work with very few exceptions. So the solution, we believe that we need to be more deliberately multiracial and ethnic. We don't think that our system currently responds and interrogates to the complex identity of Latinx folks, and positioning that within a racial equity framework, which is often dominated by just black and white conversations. And America and North Carolina is radically different than that. There's a nuance there that exists between race and ethnicity, and that has implications on culture and language, right? Framing ESL programs as a racial equity issue, with the understanding that many of our emergent bilingual students, and certainly students of color writ large, but a large share of that are Latinx students, although not exclusively. Actively increasing the number of same-race teachers for Latinx students is going to be an area that we're going to have to focus on aggressively in order to close opportunity gaps, because there's an advantage for having folks who look like you, come from the same cultural background, et cetera. And then offering more rigorous classes and adopting more culturally responsive practices in the classroom as well that utilize the assets within Latinx communities, those whose presence predates the formation of the United States as well as our newcomers. And so lastly, just trying to do better with engaging communities, particularly the Latinx community, in educational advocacy and community organizing that puts pressure on the systems to respond to the needs of that community. Because heretofore, as you've heard Seal narrate, there just has been, I would say, an ignoring of those communities. And so we seek to sort of disrupt that power arrangement to change things as we go forward.
James, you were in the school system, right? And based on what you just described, do we feel like there's a plan today to address some of those issues to target the Latinx community?
I do not. And I think that, as Alexandra mentioned from Durham, but I think it's a state trend. You look at the populations that have fallen through the cracks of the COVID response. It is overwhelmingly emerging bilingual families. And, clearly we didn't have a plan for COVID, but even the plans that we crafted just did not adequately respond to the specific needs of those communities. And again, whereas, that's not all Latinx families, it certainly is a large share. And I just don't think that we understand even the difference between, immigrant populations, voluntary versus involuntary immigrants, and, those who are refugees in the circumstances. I'm just going to talk plainly, the push and the pull factors that even cause them to be in the United States foreign policy activity that creates instability in some nations. We just don't, as a system, have an understanding of our position in the world, and furthermore, that of our students, particularly Latinx students.
Okay, thank you for that. Banu, You and I talk about this all the time, and I serve on the board of the Charlotte Bilingual Preschool. But, every year about 3,000 Hispanic Latino children enter kindergarten in Mecklenburg County. As the executive director of Charlotte Bilingual Preschool, with the focus on early education, without equity, education can create structural inequities and can create a domino effect on income inequality. What changes do we need to do now to ensure that our children are set up to be competitive with their peers when they enter kindergarten at age 5?
Yeah, so, I heard Sil talk about what we needed, right? And we needed places that where children see themselves reflected, where they speak the language, where they understand the culture. That's exactly the work that we do. And to your point, Grace, we're small. We're the only dual language Spanish-speaking serving preschool in the state that's licensed. So we're a unique little monster, right? And we serve only 144 children, but there are 3,000 children that enter CMS pre-K kindergarten every year. So we did an alumni tracking study that showed that our students, our graduates, outperform the Latinx peer all the way through second grade in reading and math. So we know that we have something that works. It's working, and it works for all these reasons. The children see themselves reflected. The education is in language 1, supports language 2, gives the families the support that they need. So I think that what we need to do is exactly what we're doing in our strategic plan, which is we need to expand. We need to create more opportunities for children to have access to an early education. Again, without a high quality early education, children drop out of high school. A fourth of them drop out of high school. There's a strong correlation between A and B. So more access to those programs, pathways for families to work. The real problem that our families have is not lack of access to early high quality education. It's actually poverty. it's economic marginalization. So what we need to figure out is how to give ways for our families to work. And so part of the work that we're doing is expanding our hours and going 0 to 5. Part of our strategic plan is because we need to be able to provide for families a way to leave their child someplace where they can feel comfortable leaving their child while they pursue education and work. And then also the child benefits from additional exposure. Starting at 4 years old, which is the pre-K model in the United States, it's not enough, particularly for our children. We got to go earlier. We have to do home visiting. We have to start when it's a baby, when it's a teeny tiny one, right? And then creating the pathways for work. We're doing a talent development a model where we are funneling our families into careers in early education, because we're going to grow and we're going to need more early educators. And what you get there is the double bang for the buck, right? The family gets a job and they're an educator, but they also become a better parent. So that combination of a 2-generation approach, if we start doing that now, that's going to be the way to go. So more supports for our families.
Thank you, Banu, for that. And I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask you this question anyway, Banu. If it was up to you, would you expand your footprint across the region to support those children? And I see James Ford smiling, everyone's smiling. So again, if it was up to you, would you expand your footprint to serve the Hispanic community?
Yes, and and again, if there's a model that works, we have a model that works, that it's proven effective. Why would we not grow it? We got to grow it. And the only challenge we don't grow it is because we don't have the resources. But we have a map for growth. So it is the guaranteed pathway to security. The other thing that I didn't mention is that it can't just be focused on preschool. It's got to be the whole pre-K-12.
Right.
It's got to be pre-K college job. And then we can say, okay, now we got you, right? It's got to be the support all the way through. It's got to be super connected. But it begins at the early stages with strong family support and getting that child the language that they need. It's just, we had a child that came to Charlotte Bilingual Preschool. He couldn't speak. He couldn't speak a word. And he was 3 years old. We figured out that the child was on the autism spectrum. We provided him with speech therapy, with the behavioral support that he needed. By the time that he graduated, he not only spoke, but he was socially connecting with other children. That child, without that intervention, would have started kindergarten with no language. That would have been the end of that child's career. That would have been a drain to the system, a drain to themselves, to their own. Anyway, I can preach about this all day long. But the point being, right, without that intervention, children go behind. So we just got to start earlier. And yes, let's do this together. We can let's expand nationally for all the.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you for that, Banu. So, James, I'm going to shift back to you. I think back to 2017, Lead and Opportunity as one of the co-chairs of that council, the Lead and Opportunity Council. Education is necessary to economic mobility, right? What can we do to drive impact and change to drive upward mobility, economic mobility in the region and beyond?
Yeah, so I appreciate you acknowledging that work, and I'll try to be fair so as to make time for my colleagues to speak as well. Part of my critique, candidly, of the Leading on Opportunity work, and although I'm very proud of it, was that it didn't center race and ethnicity enough. And because of that, it ignored some really systemic barriers that people of color face in trying to mobilize themselves. In addition to the fact that it frankly didn't key in enough on the Latinx population. Whereas, education is certainly a major factor, right, in helping folks to mobilize themselves. There will still be an existent wealth gap. Even if we do everything correct, access to pre-K, affordable housing, there is a pre-existent racialized wealth gap and an opportunity structure. And communities in color in particular suffer at the hand of that. And so I think there needs to be more focus, not just on like the wage gap and income, but also the wealth gap and the assets that come along with that. And unfortunately, education alone can't diminish that. 40%. As much as 40% of Black and brown wealth was wiped out in the Great Recession because of, I say respectfully, financial institutions targeting Black and brown folks with subprime loans, even when they qualified for better terms. We know that, white citizens who have less education still have significantly more wealth than Black and Latinx folk with post-secondary degrees. So that said, we got to find better ways to create access to education, particularly post-secondary opportunities, where folks can qualify for mid to high skilled jobs, be that, apprenticeships, paid apprenticeships, all of those things are on the table. Students of color are disproportionately saddled with student loan debt. So we got to figure out ways to make college more affordable and tuition free, preferably, tuition equity, particularly for undocumented students who have to pay out-of-state tuitions despite being residents here in North Carolina or don't qualify for certain scholarships in the UNC system. And our friends, Our Turn NC, has done work that's been targeted toward that. All this has to be responded to from an educational standpoint if we want to put students in a position to create wealth, which eventually will mobilize themselves upward. But if we don't key in on those things, it'll be very tough. And I just want to throw this caveat out there that a study has just been released from the Brookings Institution that looks at Charlotte, particularly the social networks that Banu just spoke about. And it found that the weakest social networks in Charlotte exist in the Latinx community. And so until that changes, until power starts being shared in that way, it'll be very tough for Charlotte or even the region to help change that mobility picture.
And what's interesting, James, is that what we found when we studied the types of relationships that our families have between bridging and bonding, right? The bridging are the ones that I have with people that I don't know just to get services, and the bonding relationships of the one that I have with people that are close to me that provide social emotional support. Our families were really low in bonding relationships, and you would imagine that it's differently, but it's because you're talking about an immigrant community, right? They are isolated. The narrative is isolating, and so even though intuitively you would think these families need to be more connected outwardly. No, actually, we need to begin to connect them more inwardly, with feeling a sense of pride and a sense of connection with my people that I know, which is what gives me this emotional stability to now be present for my child's education. You know, and that was really surprising to me, to imagine, we need to provide more outward connection, more opportunity for them to have strong bonds with each other. But it continues to speak to mobility, right? Because you are not going to be mobile if you're not feeling secure about your own emotional state. If you don't have friends, you've got all kinds of issues, and that's even more basic than the bridging relationships. So we got to start, again, creating opportunities for families to get together, to build those strong networks that they had back at home when they were part of a large community. Then the bridging happens. And again, how do we design systems that really take into account that information, that actually begins to look at what's really happening, and don't design a system without.
That's right. Thank you both for that. Appreciate it. So I'm going to move on, and I'm going to ask Alexandra. I'm going to ask you this question. As a member of the Durham Public School Board and the first Latina elected to the Board of Education, what observations did you make, and what are the key changes the Board of Education plans to implement to close the equity gap in education?
Thank you for that. Yes, it's definitely something that I started before running for office. I'm very lucky and grateful that I got to participate in our strategic plan. So we mapped out a plan from 2018 to 2023, and this plan has 5 priorities. Those priorities are all based on equity. We do have a racial equity lens to all of them, but priority number 1 is we want to increase academic achievement. When we started looking at what our ratings were across the different districts, and for example, we had like looking at what our Latino students, how they were performing across the state. And in Durham, for being one of the largest districts, it was definitely something very jarring to see us at the bottom, and so or among the bottom counties. And so increasing academic achievement, providing a safe school environment that supports the whole child. So we do have a holistic way. We have, during those sessions, we talked about some of the, the need for restorative practice centers, and we talked about sense of belonging. We talked about our kids growing, the development that is, socio-emotional, as well as, academic development, all kinds of development, right? So, there's that environment, and priority number 3 is we want to be able to attract and retain high quality educators and staff that reflect the populations that we are serving. We are a district that is 80% Black and Brown. And so, we have lots of immigrant families. We have, newcomer families. We do have a newcomer center housed within the, we call it the PLC Performing Learning Center. And so we have these systems set up, but, these support set up, but we do need to expand them. So, and we do also need to ensure that our teachers that are serving these populations are not being, pulled in so many different directions. Sometimes you have one teacher that is bilingual in the building, and they're being pulled, to come and do this parent-teacher conference for this other teacher. They're being pulled to, come sort this thing out or explain. So it's like we need to make sure that we have adequate staffing and that we retain high-quality talent. The other thing is also strengthening the school family and community engagement. That has been a big piece. We have definitely invited a lot of community members to come. We incentivize our community to reach out to us at our emails, come to our board meetings, and we've had a lot of engagement. Sometimes we have over 100 comments, and we can't read them all. We do post them all. We do try to do justice to each one, at least sharing whether it's a minute or two. But beyond that, who comes to board meetings is not exactly all the parents, right? So we need to go out to the community, and that's been my approach to ensuring that I am very visible and present in communities, and that whether it's a forum or whether it's I'm intentionally visiting these neighborhoods, being able to tell them we're here to serve you, and our systems, and the way we set things up, whether it's public comment, all that doesn't work for you, tell us what works for you, right? And we will meet you where you're at. The other thing is we also need to be fiscally responsible. I mean, resources are one of those things. We don't get to derive our own income, our own financial. We don't get to tax, our residents as a board. We don't have that power. That power is the county commissioners. They're the ones that give us the money. And so, we have to be fiscally responsible, operationally responsible. And, we have been looking at sustainable practices, sometimes even savings in some of those areas and operations, definitely do allow us to serve our kids better. One of the things that we do with contracts is that, we're starting to notice that they're catching our drift. When contractors come in, some of them are supporting CTE pathways, which is helping our kids, especially our high school students, figure out like some careers and get their hands, get hands-on experience with some of these technical jobs. And so if these contractors, come and it's something that I'm seeing more and more, that we are, building that partnership and instilling in all these priorities, that we are centering our kids and giving them as many opportunities, and definitely addressing the equity concerns that we have.
Thank you for that. And congratulations again. Great work. And it's good that y'all have a 5-year strategy. And I know you're going to continue to advocate for those changes for the community and represent the Hispanic, the Latinx community. So I'm going to come to you. And the question I have for you is, what do you think needs to happen to provide inclusive and fair education to diverse communities?
Yeah, so, long-term goal will be dismantle all the different racist policies that are embedded in our educational system. But short-term, I think that what we see could be done starting today is changing the mindset and the intentionality in which school systems and schools, and all the way down to teachers and how they relate to diverse communities, changing the perspective from a deficit thinking, which holds the students responsible for the challenges and inequalities that they face, to an uplifting narrative that values the richness and the diversity of the students' backgrounds, inviting them to the table, taking advantage of the knowledge that they bring with them. I deeply believe in something that is ingrained in every single corner of our organization here. Is just humility when it comes to support diverse students. In Charlotte-Mecklenburg School, and still blows my mind to this day, there are 195 countries in the world, and 187 countries are represented right here. So I don't understand, why are we still translating things only to Spanish? For a school to just, analyze their population and say, okay, we have 23 different countries represented. We may have 23 different ways to build a garden. So let's invite them to the table. Let's not shut them out. And I think that it goes towards justice. And I really want to touch on this because it's important, and it's not directly to education, but we know that undocumented parents cannot participate in field trips because they don't have a driver license that they can use to have a background check. And I think that's just cruel. So, in policy and justice, we should advocate for parents to have an ID and to have their identity back and to have their, sense of belonging to a community that they belong to. They've been here for 20 years and they're still not feel part of it. And I think that the schools are the best way to get that started. So I think that those are the two things that I think we can do: mindset and intentionality, and language access. Those can be done today.
Right. And I know we're running out of time, but still, let me ask you this question. So of the 180 plus languages that are in our school system, I've been in Charlotte for 14 years now. Have you seen, and we've talked about this so many times, it's English and Spanish, and sometimes even with Spanish, but do we feel like we've made any progress with some of those other languages and having materials in language for some of these other languages of folks, immigrant, refugees? Have we made any progress?
I think that there is progress in the fact that the schools have on-call interpreters in different languages, but I still don't see families receiving paperwork in their own languages. Something that it goes beyond the academic system too. It's, local governments. We have spent the entire summer since March pushing for COVID prevention posters and information to be in Nepali, in Burmese, in Arabic, and we still don't have them. And that is just mind-blowing to me, that then we see the numbers and we see the results and we're all shocked. well, I mean, what were the efforts to change that? So, I mean, I think that we are better than we were 10 years ago, 100%. I think that the awareness across the city of Charlotte has improved. And I think that the way that our American-born neighbors, the way they see us right now, it's much warmer and loving than it had ever been. But still, I think that as far as systems, like Alex and James were saying, I mean, there's a lot of work to do.
Okay. James, what about you? What do you think? Same question. What do you think needs to happen for that, to provide inclusive and fair education in our communities?
Yeah, so I'll just be brief because I think Sil did an excellent job of sort of wrapping it up. But literally, our organization, our transformation model for education is to center students of color. And that's what I would say. Start centering them, like really making them the center of your decision making and allow everything else to revolve around them. And I think if we take that approach, we'll start to see more inclusion. And
okay, so I think we only have just a couple of minutes left, and I'm going to ask everyone this question. We talked a lot about challenges, talked about different opportunities around education equity. The question I have for all of you is, if you could make one change to impact the challenges in equity in education, what would it be and why? And Sil, we'll start with you.
Yes, dream building here. I would love to see schools to have the autonomy to decide how they spend their money, how their curriculum is presented, the activities that they offer the kids, and to have not only a needs assessment of the community around it, but also a resource inventory to best support the community they're in. I don't think there's a reason why every single one of the schools have the same exact schedule and meals, and that's equality, is not equity.
Thank you. Banu, what about you? Oh, we may have lost Banu. Alexandra, we'll go to you.
Yeah, I'm definitely for inclusion, and especially culturally relevant pedagogy and professional development that needs to be embedded. I think we need to grow our own, cultivate our own. I tell our district, we know that we don't have adequate staffing for, like bilingual teachers and all that. We can definitely incentivize even the teachers that we have, like as we continue to recruit talent, that even the teachers that have been with us for the longest, like, let's give them access to, to language immersion. Let's continue to sponsor, the kind of trainings that will allow us to cultivate from within, and also, bring in talent, of course, but definitely build from within, cultivate from within, and be really intentional about culturally relevant approaches to our education.
Thank you. James?
Really briefly, I'd just say I'm a proponent of student surveys that are part of the accountability framework, that are broken out by race and ethnicity. Students can report back to you what their experiences are like, and there's accountability behind that. I think we'll start to see change, but it'll be based on the perception.
Thank you. And would you say that, James, that student survey, would that be once a year, once a semester? What's the frequency? What would you recommend the frequency should be?
He has no object, twice a year, once a semester.
Okay, once a semester. Okay, excellent. Okay, so thank you special thanks to, of course, the distinguished panel, James Ford with Creed, Silgan Sosa with Our Bridge for Kids. We, of course, had Banu with Charlotte Bilingual Preschool, and, of course, Alexandria Valdez, Durham Public School Board member. And Daniel, thank you very much again. And thanks to everyone who was able to join us. Really appreciate it. With that, Daniel, I'm going to turn it. Actually, I think we want to do can we do a group selfie or group fee?
We can everybody hit the groupie, virtual groupie on there. And I'm going to go ahead and get it started. And so then just take your photo, and then it will take.
This is so cool. I love it.
Okay. So once we have enough folks in there, 2 people finish, 3 people, so we can do that. While folks are taking their groupies, please stick around. We have some cafecito chats, social mixers, some special remarks from Senator Schumer to close out the day today. So please make sure that that you take advantage of all of the different things that we have going on if you are registered for the summit.
Great. Thank you so much.
Great. So we're going to go ahead and end the grouping now. We have about 2 seconds left. Perfect. All right. I think that was it.
Thank you.
That was awesome, all. Thank you.
Thank you all as well. Y'all have a good one. Thank you so much for joining.
Pleasure.
Of course. Thanks.
Bye.